The roar of floodwaters tearing through Agua Caliente, Arizona, was the last thing Bethany Adams remembered before the darkness took her. The year was 1885, and the spring that had promised new beginnings had instead delivered death on churning, muddy currents. Xavier Lawson rode his dapple gray gelding along the swollen banks of the Agua Caliente River, squinting against the harsh afternoon sun. The flood had finally receded, leaving behind a wake of destruction that stretched across the territory. Branches, livestock, and pieces of homesteads littered the riverbanks. As a cattle rancher who'd lost half his herd to the raging waters, he'd been riding for 3 days straight, hoping to recover what he could. It was then that he saw her, a woman's body caught in a tangle of driftwood. Her dress, once blue, now stained with mud, clung to her still form. Xavier dismounted quickly, splashing through the shallows to reach her. He assumed she was dead, like so many others the river had claimed, but something compelled him to check. When he turned her over, he was struck by her beauty even through the mud and bruises that marred her face. Her chestnut hair, matted with debris, framed features that appeared delicate even in their battered state. Xavier pressed 2 fingers to her neck, expecting nothing. A faint pulse answered his touch. "My God," he whispered, immediately lifting her from the water. Her eyelids fluttered briefly, revealing a glimpse of hazel eyes before closing again. As he carried her to his horse, he felt her body go slack, as if surrendering to death now that someone had found her. "Don't go," he said, the words escaping before he could think. "Stay with me, miss, stay with me." Xavier managed to get her onto his horse, mounting behind her and supporting her limp body against his chest. He knew Doc Miller's place was at least an hour's ride, and he wasn't sure she'd make it that long. His own ranch was closer, just 20 minutes if he pushed his horse hard. "Hold on," he murmured to the unconscious woman as he urged his horse into a gallop. "Just hold on." The journey to the Copper Crown Ranch seemed to take forever. Xavier's arms ached from holding the woman steady, but he didn't dare slow his pace. Every few minutes, he would check her breathing, relieved to find the shallow rise and fall of her chest continuing its fragile rhythm. The ranch house came into view just as the sun began its descent behind the distant mountains. His foreman, Henry, spotted him from the corral and ran to meet him. "Boss, what have you got there?" Henry called, his weathered face creasing with concern as Xavier slowed his horse. "Found her in the river," Xavier explained, carefully dismounting while supporting the woman. "She's alive, but barely. Run ahead and tell Mrs. Finch to prepare a bed." Henry nodded and sprinted toward the house while Xavier carried the woman, struck by how light she felt in his arms despite her waterlogged clothes. Mrs. Finch, the housekeeper who had looked after Xavier since his parents' death 10 years earlier, already had the door open when he reached the porch. "Lord have mercy," the older woman gasped, taking in the sight of the half-drowned woman. "Bring her to the guest room, Mr. Lawson." "I've got water heating." Xavier followed Mrs. Finch through the spacious ranch house to the guest bedroom, where he gently laid the woman on the bed. "She needs a doctor," he said, reluctant to leave her side. "Her breathing's weak." Mrs. Finch was already examining the woman with practiced hands. "Henry can fetch Doc Miller. You go on now and let me tend to her. She needs dry clothes and warming up, and it wouldn't be proper for you to stay." Xavier hesitated, then nodded. "I'll send Henry right away, and Mrs. Finch, do whatever you need to save her." Over the next hours, Xavier paced the hallway outside the guest room, stopping whenever Mrs. Finch emerged with requests for fresh water or clean linens. Doc Miller arrived just after sundown, his medical bag in hand, looking exhausted from the endless stream of flood victims he'd been treating. "Another one from the river?" Doc asked, setting his bag down and removing his hat. Found her caught in some debris, Xavier explained. She was alive but hasn't woken yet. The doctor nodded grimly. Lost 23 souls to this flood already. Let's see if we can keep this one with us. Xavier waited outside while Doc Miller examined the woman, joined eventually by Mrs. Finch, who wiped her hands on her apron. She's young, Mrs. Finch said quietly. Not much more than 20, I'd say. No wedding ring. Found nothing in her pockets to tell who she might be. Could be from anywhere, Xavier replied. That flood tore through 3 settlements upstream. When Doc Miller finally emerged, his expression was cautious. She's suffered a blow to the head, several broken ribs, and she's swallowed a fair amount of river water. There's fever setting in, which concerns me most. The next day or two will tell whether she lives or dies. What can we do? Xavier asked. Keep her warm. Try to get some broth into her if she wakes. Watch for signs the fever's worsening. Doc Miller closed his bag. I'll come back tomorrow if I can, but with so many needing help. I understand, Xavier said, pressing some money into the doctor's hand. Take this for your trouble. After the doctor left, Xavier took up his post in a chair outside the guest room. Mrs. Finch tried to persuade him to get some rest, but he refused. Something about this woman called to him, perhaps the miraculous fact of finding her alive, or maybe something deeper he couldn't yet name. In the early hours of morning, Xavier heard a soft sound from within the room. He entered quietly to find the woman stirring, her face flushed with fever. He approached the bed and gently pressed a cool cloth to her forehead. Her eyes opened hazel with flecks of gold that caught the lamplight. For a moment, she stared at him uncomprehendingly. Water, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Xavier quickly poured water from a pitcher and helped raise her head enough to drink. She managed only a few sips before collapsing back against the pillows. You're safe, he told her. You're at Copper Crown Ranch. I found you in the river. She tried to speak again, but the effort seemed too much. Instead, tears began to stream down her face. Don't try to talk now, Xavier said. Just rest. You're going to be all right. The woman's hand moved slightly, and Xavier found himself taking it in his own. Her fingers were delicate but calloused, the hands of someone who worked hard for a living. My name is Xavier Lawson, he said. Can you tell me yours? She swallowed painfully. Bethany, she managed. Bethany Adams. Miss Adams, he said. You're safe here, I promise. She seemed to take comfort in his words, her eyes closing once more as exhaustion claimed her. Xavier remained by her side, still holding her hand, until Mrs. Finch came to relieve him at dawn. For 3 days, Bethany drifted between consciousness and delirium as the fever raged through her body. Xavier found himself drawn to her room again and again, helping Mrs. Finch change compresses and coax broth between Bethany's cracked lips. In her fevered state, she sometimes called out names Sarah, Mother, Pa, and once she cried, I won't go with you, Thomas. With such vehemence that Xavier wondered who this Thomas might be. On the 4th morning, Xavier entered the sick room to find Bethany awake and clear-eyed for the first time. She was propped against pillows, a quilt drawn up to her chin, looking pale but alert. Mr. Lawson, she said, her voice stronger than before. Mrs. Finch told me you pulled me from the river. Xavier approached, suddenly feeling awkward. I'm glad to see you're feeling better, Miss Adams. You saved my life. Her direct gaze held his. I don't know how to thank you. No thanks needed, he replied, settling into the chair beside her bed. Anyone would have done the same. Mrs. Finch says the flood killed many people. Bethany's eyes clouded. I was traveling with others, my sister Sarah and a family named Hollister. We were in a wagon when the waters came. Xavier took her hand gently. I'm sorry. There are still search parties out looking for survivors, but Bethany nodded, understanding his unfinished thought. Sarah was only 16. We were going to start a millinery shop in Tucson. A tear slid down her cheek. She was all the family I had left. I'm truly sorry for your loss, Miss Adams, Xavier said, feeling the inadequacy of his words. Bethany wiped away the tear with a shaking hand. I should leave as soon as I'm able. I've imposed on your hospitality too long already. You're not imposing, Xavier insisted. You're welcome to stay until you're fully recovered. Besides, where would you go? The question hung between them, highlighting Bethany's desperate situation. She had lost everything: family, possessions, plans for the future, all swept away by the floodwaters. I don't know, she admitted, but I can work. I'm a skilled seamstress and milliner, perhaps in town. Agua Caliente is half destroyed, Xavier told her gently. And you're in no condition to travel to Tucson or anywhere else right now. Please stay until you're stronger. We can figure things out then. Bethany looked as though she might argue, but instead she nodded. You're very kind, Mr. Lawson. Xavier, he corrected with a smile. If you're staying under my roof for a while, you might as well call me by my given name. Xavier, she repeated, a faint smile touching her lips. Then you must call me Bethany. Over the next week, Bethany's strength gradually returned. She began taking short walks around the house, assisted by either Xavier or Mrs. Finch. Xavier found himself increasingly drawn to her company, impressed by her resilience in the face of such tragedy. He learned that Bethany had been raised in St. Louis, the daughter of a tailor. After her parents died of influenza 2 years earlier, she had supported herself and her younger sister through her sewing skills. The opportunity to open a shop in the growing town of Tucson had seemed like providence until the flood changed everything. Sarah was so excited about our new start, Bethany confided one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. She loved adventure. I was the cautious one, always worrying. You're braver than you think, Xavier told her. Not many could face such loss with your grace. Bethany glanced at him, surprise in her eyes. I don't feel brave. Most nights I cry myself to sleep thinking of her. That's not weakness, Xavier said. That's love. A comfortable silence fell between them as the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky. Xavier found himself studying Bethany's profile, noting how the evening breeze lifted strands of her chestnut hair, now clean and shining. Her bruises had faded, revealing smooth skin that had yet to be weathered by the harsh Arizona sun. Tell me about your ranch, Bethany said eventually. Mrs. Finch mentioned your parents started it. Xavier nodded. Pa came west in '49 during the gold rush but found his fortune in cattle instead. Met my mother in San Francisco and brought her here to what was then just wilderness. They built this place from nothing. He paused, memories surfacing. Lost them both to a Comanche raid when I was 18. Been running Copper Crown ever since. I'm sorry, Bethany said softly. You were so young to take on such responsibility. Had good men to help me, Xavier replied, and Mrs. Finch, she was my mother's friend who came to help after. He cleared his throat. Anyway, we've done all right. 5,000 acres, almost 800 head of cattle before the flood. Now maybe half that. Will you recover? Concern lined Bethany's face. In time, Xavier assured her. We've weathered worse. Drought of '77 nearly finished us, but we pulled through. Bethany's gaze swept over the ranch that stretched before them, the sturdy barn, the corral where several horses grazed, the bunkhouse where the ranch hands stayed. It's a beautiful place, she said. You should be proud of what you've maintained. Her words warmed him unexpectedly. Few people understood the work and heart he had poured into Copper Crown. Something about Bethany's genuine appreciation made him want to show her more: the hidden waterfall in the north pasture, the ancient petroglyphs carved into rock walls in the eastern canyon, The view from Mesa Point, where you could see 50 miles on a clear day. "Perhaps tomorrow, if you're feeling up to it," he suggested. "I could show you around the ranch properly, on horseback if Doc Miller says it's all right." Bethany hesitated. "I'm not much of a rider, I'm afraid. City girl, remember," Xavier smiled. "I have a mare gentle enough for a child. And I'll be right beside you." "Then I'd like that very much," Bethany replied, her answering smile transforming her face in a way that made Xavier's heart skip a beat. The next morning dawned clear and mild. Xavier had already spoken with Doc Miller, who had pronounced Bethany well enough for light activity, provided she didn't overexert herself. Xavier had Honey, his gentlest mare, saddled and waiting when Bethany emerged from the house. She had borrowed clothes from Mrs. Finch's simple blouse and skirt that had been hastily altered to fit her slighter frame. Her hair was braided and wrapped around her head in a practical crown. Something about seeing her in these Western clothes, ready for a ride across his land, struck Xavier deeply. "You look ready for the trail, Miss Adams," he said, helping her mount. Bethany adjusted herself in the saddle, looking nervous but determined. "I'll try not to fall off and embarrass myself." "I wouldn't let that happen," Xavier promised, mounting his own stallion. "We'll take it slow." They rode at a leisurely pace, Xavier pointing out features of the ranch as they went the creek that provided water for the cattle, the stand of cottonwoods his father had planted, the new fence line his men had been working on before the flood. "How many men work for you?" Bethany asked, growing more comfortable on horseback as they continued. 12 full-time, more during roundup and branding," Xavier replied. "Good men, most of them, been with me for years. And do you?" Bethany seemed to search for the right words. "Is there a Mrs. Lawson who helps manage all this?" Xavier chuckled. "No, no wife. Never seemed to find the time for courting, I suppose. Or maybe the right woman." Bethany nodded, and Xavier thought he detected a hint of color in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the sun. They rode in companionable silence for a while, until they reached a rise that overlooked a verdant valley where a portion of Xavier's herd grazed. "It's breathtaking," Bethany said, gazing out over the landscape. "I never understood the appeal of open country before, but now I see it." "It gets in your blood," Xavier agreed. "The freedom of it, room to breathe." "Is that why you stay? The freedom?" Xavier considered her question. "Partly, but also because this land holds my family's story. Every fence post, every branded calf, every repaired roof, it's all part of what my parents built and what I'm trying to honor." Bethany studied him with those perceptive hazel eyes. "You speak about it with such passion. It's admirable." Something in her tone made Xavier curious. "What about you? What were your passions before?" "Before the flood," Bethany finished for him. "My hats, I suppose. I loved creating something beautiful that made women feel special. Each one was different, designed for the individual." A wistful smile crossed her face. "I had a way of knowing exactly what style would suit a person just by looking at them." "What would you design for me?" Xavier asked, half joking. Bethany tilted her head, appraising him with a professional eye that suddenly made him feel self-conscious. "Something practical but with character. A cattleman's hat, but perhaps with a slightly narrower brim than you're wearing now. The crown shaped to frame your face better." She blushed suddenly. "I'm sorry, that's presumptuous of me." "Not at all," Xavier said, touching the brim of his well-worn hat. "I reckon you know your business better than I do." They continued their ride, eventually stopping by a small stream for lunch. Xavier had packed a simple meal of bread, cheese, and dried fruit, which they shared sitting on a blanket in the shade of an ancient oak. "I should repay your kindness somehow," Bethany said suddenly. "Perhaps I could help Mrs. Finch with the housework or mend clothes for your ranch hands." "You don't need to earn your keep," Xavier assured her. "You're my guest." "I'm not accustomed to charity, Xavier," Bethany said, her voice gentle but firm. "I've always made my own way." Xavier admired her pride even as he wished she would simply accept his help. "It's not charity among friends," he said. "But if it makes you feel better, I'm sure Mrs. Finch would welcome an extra pair of hands. She's been complaining about mending that's piled up." Bethany's face brightened. "I'd be happy to help with that, and perhaps—" she hesitated. "Perhaps I might use some of your leather scraps to try making a hat." "I've worked with leather before, though not often." "Of course," Xavier agreed. "Take whatever materials you need." They returned to the ranch house in the late afternoon, Bethany tired but visibly uplifted by the day's excursion. Xavier helped her down from her horse, his hands lingering at her waist perhaps a moment longer than necessary. Their eyes met briefly, and something unspoken passed between them before Bethany looked away. "Thank you for today," she said softly. "It helped me forget, just for a little while." "Anytime," Xavier replied, meaning it more than he'd expected to. True to her word, Bethany began helping around the ranch the very next day. She took over the mending, her skilled fingers making quick work of torn shirts and worn socks. Mrs. Finch, initially territorial about her domain, soon came to appreciate Bethany's assistance and meticulous work. Xavier found himself inventing reasons to be around the house, more than usual paperwork that could be done at the kitchen table instead of in town. Tools that needed repair on the porch rather than in the barn. He enjoyed watching Bethany integrate herself into ranch life, her city mannerisms gradually giving way to more practical Western ways. A week after their ride, Xavier returned from checking fence lines to find Bethany sitting on the porch, working intently on something in her lap. As he approached, he realized she was crafting a hat from leather scraps, her fingers working deftly with needle and thread. "How's it coming along?" he asked, settling beside her on the porch bench. Bethany held up her creation, a surprisingly well-formed cattleman's hat, not quite finished but showing skilled workmanship. "What do you think? It's for you, actually, to replace the one you're wearing, which has seen better days." Xavier removed his hat, examining the cracked leather and sweat-stained band. "This old thing has been with me through 8 summers, he said with a chuckle. "But I reckon you're right about it needing replacement." "Try this one," Bethany urged, handing him her creation. "I can still make adjustments." Xavier placed the hat on his head, surprised by how well it fit. The leather was supple yet sturdy, the stitching neat and tight. "It's perfect," he said, genuinely impressed. "You have a gift, Bethany." She beamed at his praise. "It needs a proper band and some finishing touches, but I'm pleased with how it's turning out." She reached up to adjust it slightly on his head, her fingers brushing his hair. "Yes, that shape suits you much better." Their faces were close, and Xavier found himself studying the delicate curve of her cheek, the small scar near her eyebrow that he hadn't noticed before, the way her eyelashes cast tiny shadows on her skin. The moment was broken by the sound of approaching horses. Xavier stood, recognizing Sheriff Tanner's distinctive gray gelding leading a small party toward the ranch house. "Wonder what brings the sheriff out this way," Xavier murmured, stepping off the porch to greet the visitors. Sheriff Tanner, a barrel-chested man with a salt and pepper mustache, dismounted with a grunt. "Afternoon, Lawson. Got some news might interest you and the lady you rescued." Xavier tensed, instinctively glancing back at Bethany, who had set aside her work and was watching curiously. "What kind of news, Sheriff?" "Found some survivors from upstream," Tanner explained, "including a young girl who matches the description of the sister Miss Adams has been asking about in town." Xavier's heart leaped. "Sarah? You found Sarah Adams?" "Can't say for certain it's her," the sheriff cautioned. Girl's not talking much. Traumatized, Doc says, but she's about 16, chestnut hair like Miss Adams there. Was found clinging to a tree 5 miles downstream from where the Hollister wagon was last seen. Bethany had come to stand beside Xavier, her face pale with hope and fear. Where is she? Is she hurt? At Doc Miller's place in town, Sheriff Tanner replied. Thought you'd want to know right away. Figured Miss Adams might want to come see if it's her sister. Yes, of course, Bethany said, her voice trembling. I need to go immediately. Xavier placed a steadying hand on her arm. I'll hitch up the buggy. It'll be faster than riding for you. While Xavier prepared the buggy, Bethany rushed inside to change into a fresh dress one misses. Finch had helped her make from fabric found in the attic. When she emerged, her hair hastily pinned up and a shawl around her shoulders, Xavier was struck by the mixture of hope and dread in her expression. Ready? He asked gently, helping her into the buggy. Bethany nodded, too overcome with emotion to speak. The sheriff and his men had already started back to town, but Xavier knew a shortcut that would get them there almost as quickly. The journey to Agua Caliente seemed interminable, though it took less than an hour. Xavier kept glancing at Bethany, who sat rigid beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. What if it's not her? She whispered when the first buildings of town came into view. Or what if it is, but she's changed by what happened? Then you'll face it together, Xavier said simply. And you won't be alone. I promise you that. Bethany reached over and squeezed his hand briefly. Thank you for everything. Doc Miller's office was at the end of the town's main street, one of the few structures that had escaped major flood damage due to its position on higher ground. Xavier helped Bethany down from the buggy and escorted her inside, where they found the doctor speaking with Sheriff Tanner in the front room. Miss Adams, Doc Miller said, turning to them. The sheriff told me you were coming. The young lady is resting in the back room. Is she? Bethany couldn't finish the question. She's physically recovered for the most part, the doctor explained. Some bruising, minor cuts, exhaustion, but she's not speaking much, which concerns me. Shock affects people differently. Can I see her? Bethany asked, already moving toward the door Doc Miller had indicated. Of course, just prepare yourself. She may not react the way you expect. Xavier hung back, not wanting to intrude on what could be a deeply personal reunion, but Bethany turned to him with pleading eyes. Will you come with me? I don't think I can do this alone. How could he refuse? Xavier nodded and followed her to the door, which Doc Miller opened for them. The room beyond was small and simply furnished a bed, a chair, a small window letting in the afternoon light. On the bed lay a young girl, her chestnut hair spread across the pillow, her face turned toward the window. Sarah, Bethany called softly. The girl turned and Xavier heard Bethany's sharp intake of breath. Even without ever having seen Sarah Adams before, Xavier knew immediately this was not Bethany's sister. Though there was a resemblance in coloring, the face was different, the features arranged in ways that spoke of another family entirely. I'm sorry, the girl said, her voice barely audible. Everyone keeps calling me different names. I don't know who I am. Bethany approached the bed slowly, disappointment evident in every line of her body. You don't remember your name, the girl shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. I don't remember anything before the water. The doctor says I hit my head. Xavier placed a comforting hand on Bethany's shoulder as she sank into the chair beside the bed. I'm so sorry, Bethany told the girl. I thought you might be my sister, but you're not. Your family must be looking for you too. The girl began to cry softly. What if no one is? What if they're all gone? Then new people will care for you, Bethany assured her, taking the girl's hand. Just as people have cared for me. She glanced up at Xavier, gratitude in her eyes despite her obvious heartbreak. When they left the room a few minutes later, Doc Miller was waiting with Sheriff Tanner. "Not your sister?" the sheriff asked, though the answer was clear from Bethany's expression. "No," Bethany confirmed, "but she needs help. She doesn't remember who she is." "We've been asking around," Sheriff Tanner said. "Might be she belongs to the Mitchell family from up near Creek Crossing. They lost a daughter about her age. I've sent word, and they're coming to see if she's theirs." Xavier felt Bethany trembling beside him and slipped an arm around her waist to support her. "We should get you back to the ranch," he murmured. "You've had quite a shock." Doc Miller nodded in agreement. "Rest would be wise, Miss Adams. I'm sorry about the confusion." The return journey to Copper Crown was quiet, Bethany lost in her thoughts as Xavier drove the buggy. The setting sun cast long shadows across the trail, and the evening cooled rapidly around them. "I really believed it might be her," Bethany finally said as they approached the ranch. "For a few minutes I let myself hope." "I know," Xavier replied softly. "I'm sorry." "I think I need to accept that Sarah is gone," Bethany continued, her voice surprisingly steady. "Holding on to false hope will only prolong the pain." Xavier admired her courage even as his heart ached for her loss. "Accepting it doesn't mean forgetting her," he offered. "She'll always be part of you." Bethany nodded, gazing out at the darkening landscape. "I've been thinking about what comes next. I can't stay at your ranch forever, imposing on your hospitality." "You're not imposing," Xavier protested, surprised by how strongly he felt about the idea of her leaving. "You've made yourself useful. Mrs. Finch adores you. The men appreciate their mending being done properly for once." A small smile touched Bethany's lips. "That's kind of you to say, but we both know it's not a permanent solution." She took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about setting up as a milliner here in Agua Caliente instead of Tucson. The town will rebuild and people will need normal life to resume." "Including hats." Xavier pulled the buggy to a stop outside the ranch house, turning to face her. "You'd stay in Agua Caliente." "If I could find a small place to rent, yes," Bethany said. "I noticed the Mercantile has a vacant room above it that might serve as both shop and living quarters." "Old man Jensen's been trying to rent that space for years," Xavier mused. "Might give you a good price, especially now with the town needing to recover." "Then you think it's a sensible plan?" Bethany asked, seeking his approval in a way that touched him. "I think it's a fine plan," Xavier assured her. "Though I'll miss having you here at Copper Crown." Their eyes met in the fading light, and Xavier felt a tightening in his chest that had become familiar whenever he looked at Bethany. He wanted to tell her she could stay at the ranch indefinitely, that he enjoyed her presence more than he'd enjoyed anyone's company in years, but he knew such declarations would be inappropriate given her vulnerable situation. "I would still come visit," Bethany said softly, "if I'd be welcome." "Always," Xavier replied, perhaps too quickly. He cleared his throat. "Let's get you inside. Mrs. Finch will have dinner waiting." Over the next week, Xavier helped Bethany prepare for her move to town. He rode with her to speak with Mr. Jensen about the room above the Mercantile, negotiating a fair price that included the first month free in exchange for Bethany sewing new curtains for the store windows. He also introduced her to key people in town: the banker, the freight agent, other shopkeepers who would become her neighbors. Everyone welcomed her warmly, the tight-knit community eager to incorporate a new business that represented recovery and normalcy after the devastation of the flood. Xavier found himself creating more and more reasons to accompany Bethany on her trips to town. He told himself it was to ensure her safety and comfort, but in truth, he simply enjoyed being with her. Her resilience impressed him, as did her practical approach to rebuilding her life from nothing. The night before Bethany was due to move to her new quarters, Xavier found her on the porch after dinner, gazing at the stars that blanketed the clear Arizona sky. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, joining her on the bench. Bethany smiled. "I was just thinking how different my life is now from what I'd planned. 2 months ago, I was in St. Louis, dreaming of a millinery shop in Tucson with Sarah. Now here I am, about to open a shop in a town I'd never even heard of before the flood." "Life has a way of changing our plans," Xavier observed. "Sometimes for the worse, but sometimes—" He hesitated, then continued. "Sometimes for the better." Bethany turned to face him. "I never thanked you properly, Xavier, not just for saving my life, but for everything after. Your kindness has meant more than I can express." "You don't need to thank me," Xavier said. "Having you here has been—" He searched for the right word. "A blessing." The air between them seemed to still, charged with unspoken feelings. Xavier found himself leaning slightly toward her, drawn by something he couldn't resist. Bethany didn't pull away, her eyes reflecting the starlight as they held his gaze. "I should probably turn in," she said softly, breaking the moment. "Tomorrow will be a busy day." Xavier nodded, both disappointed and relieved. Whatever was growing between them deserved time and proper consideration, not a hasty impulse on the eve of her departure. "I'll drive you to town in the morning," he offered. "Help you get settled." "Thank you," Bethany replied, rising from the bench. "Good night, Xavier." "Good night, Bethany." As he watched her disappear into the house, Xavier acknowledged to himself what he'd been avoiding. He was falling in love with Bethany Adams. The realization both thrilled and terrified him. It had been so long since he'd allowed himself to care this deeply for anyone, having dedicated his life to the ranch after his parents' death. The next morning brought a flurry of activity as Bethany prepared to leave. Mrs. Finch packed a basket of food for her, insisting she wouldn't have time to cook properly while setting up her shop. Xavier loaded Bethany's few belongings, clothes Mrs. Finch had altered for her, the sewing supplies he'd purchased in town, and some household items from the ranch that Mrs. Finch insisted were just gathering dust anyway. The drive to town was filled with practical conversation about Bethany's plans for her shop, but underneath ran a current of emotion neither of them addressed directly. When they arrived at the Mercantile, Mr. Jensen was waiting to show them upstairs. The room above the store was larger than Xavier had remembered, a single open space with windows on 3 sides, providing excellent light for detailed work. A small stove stood in one corner, and a curtained alcove concealed a narrow bed. "It's perfect," Bethany declared, turning in a circle to take it all in. "I can set up my work table here by the best light, and perhaps a small display area by the stairs for customers to see my creations." Mr. Jensen beamed, clearly pleased with her enthusiasm. "I took the liberty of having the place swept and dusted," he said, "and my wife sent over some old curtains to give you privacy until you make your own." "That's very kind," Bethany replied. "I'll have your new curtains ready within the week, Mr. Jensen." After the merchant left them alone, Xavier helped Bethany arrange her few possessions in the space. As sparse as they were, the room quickly took on a personal touch, a colorful quilt from Mrs. Finch spread on the bed, Bethany's sewing basket placed by the window, a small vase of wildflowers Xavier had picked that morning set on the table. "It feels like home already," Bethany said, though Xavier detected a hint of uncertainty in her voice. "You'll make it so," he assured her. "And remember, Copper Crown is just a short ride away if you need anything, or if you just want company." Bethany smiled gratefully. "I'll hold you to that." Xavier knew he should leave, let her settle in and begin her new life, but he found himself reluctant to go. "Will you have dinner with me tomorrow?" he asked suddenly. "At the hotel restaurant, to celebrate your new beginning. Surprise flickered across Bethany's face, followed by pleasure. "I'd like that very much." "I'll come by around 6 then," Xavier said, relief washing through him. He tipped his hat, the new one she had made him, and headed for the door. "Until tomorrow, Miss Adams." "Until tomorrow, Mr. Lawson," she replied, her formal address belied by the warmth in her voice. The next evening, Xavier arrived at Bethany's door precisely at 6, wearing his best shirt and the leather vest he saved for special occasions. He'd even polished his boots, an effort that had earned knowing smiles from his ranch hands. Bethany answered his knock looking lovelier than he'd ever seen her. She wore a blue dress that must have been another of Mrs. Finch's alterations, but it fit her perfectly, accentuating her slender waist and bringing out the blue flecks in her hazel eyes. She'd styled her hair differently too, with soft curls framing her face. "You look beautiful," Xavier said before he could stop himself. Bethany blushed. "Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself." The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Agua Caliente, not saying much compared to big cities, but they served decent food on real china plates with cloth napkins. The proprietor, Mrs. Holloway, a widow who ran the place with military precision, greeted them warmly. "Mr. Lawson, always a pleasure, and this must be Miss Adams I've been hearing about. The new milliner, yes." Mrs. Holloway's shrewd eyes took in their attire and Xavier's obvious attentiveness. "A special table for you two, I think, by the window." Over dinner, Xavier found conversation flowing easily between them. Bethany told him about the hat designs she was planning, tailored to the practical needs of Western life, but with touches of style from her Eastern background. Xavier shared stories of the ranch's early days, tales his father had told him about the territory before statehood. "I admire what you've built here," Bethany said as they lingered over coffee. "Not just the ranch, but the life you've made." "It couldn't have been easy taking over so young after losing your parents." "It wasn't," Xavier admitted. "There were times I nearly gave up. Cattle prices dropped the year after they died. Then came drought, then trouble with rustlers." He shrugged. "But something kept me going. Pride, maybe. Or not wanting to disappoint my father's memory." "I understand that feeling," Bethany said. "After my parents died, keeping Sarah safe and provided for became my whole purpose. Now that she's gone." Her voice faltered slightly. "I'm having to find new purpose." Xavier reached across the table and took her hand. "Your shop will succeed. I've seen your work, you have real talent." "Thank you," Bethany said, "but I meant something more. A reason to keep going each day beyond just survival." Their eyes met, and Xavier felt that familiar tightening in his chest. "I think I understand," he said softly. Later, as they walked back to her room in the cool evening air, Xavier gathered his courage. "Bethany," he began, stopping beneath a street lamp that cast a warm glow over them. "I've grown very fond of you in the short time we've known each other." Bethany's expression softened. "I've grown fond of you too, Xavier. I'd like to court you properly," he continued, the words coming more easily now, "if you'd permit it." A smile bloomed on Bethany's face. "I think I would like that very much." Xavier took her hand, bringing it to his lips in a gesture that felt both old-fashioned and perfectly right. "May I call on you Sunday after church then?" "I'll look forward to it," Bethany replied, her eyes shining. When they reached her door, Xavier hesitated, not wanting the evening to end but knowing propriety demanded he take his leave. Bethany solved his dilemma by rising on tiptoe and placing a soft kiss on his cheek. "Good night, Xavier," she whispered. "Good night, Bethany," he replied, touching his hat brim and backing away with a smile he couldn't suppress. The ride back to Copper Crown seemed shorter than usual. Xavier's thoughts filled with Bethany, her smile, her resilience, the feel of her hand in his. For the first time since his parents' death, He found himself imagining a future that included more than just the ranch. A future with a partner by his side, perhaps even a family someday. Over the following weeks, Xavier courted Bethany with a dedication that became the talk of Agua Caliente. He visited her shop regularly, bringing small gifts, wildflowers from the range, a length of ribbon he'd asked the freight agent to order specially from Tucson, a wooden hat stand carved by one of his ranch hands. Bethany's millinery business began to flourish as word spread of her skill. Women from Agua Caliente and surrounding settlements came to have hats made or repaired, and Bethany's distinctive style, practical yet elegant, quickly became fashionable in the territory. Xavier took pride in her success, impressed by how quickly she had established herself in the community. When he rode into town, he often found her chatting with customers or working intently at her table by the window, pins held between her lips as she shaped a hat to her exacting standards. Their courtship progressed with proper decorum but genuine affection. They attended church together on Sundays, rode out to picnic by the river on pleasant afternoons, and occasionally dined at the hotel restaurant where they had shared their first meal. 3 months after Bethany had opened her shop, Xavier asked her to accompany him to the Founders' Day dance, the biggest social event of the year in Agua Caliente, and the first major celebration since the flood. "I'd be honored," Bethany replied when he asked. "Though I should warn you, I haven't danced in quite some time." "Neither have I," Xavier admitted with a laugh. "We can step on each other's toes together." The night of the dance, Xavier arrived to escort Bethany wearing a new suit ordered from Tucson for the occasion. He found her putting the finishing touches on her appearance, a cream-colored dress with blue trim that complemented her chestnut hair, which she'd arranged in an elegant style with blue ribbons. "You take my breath away," Xavier told her, presenting a small bouquet of desert wildflowers. Bethany accepted the flowers with a smile. "Thank you. You look rather dashing yourself." She reached up to straighten his string tie. "There, perfect." The town hall had been transformed for the occasion, with lanterns hanging from the rafters and bunting draped along the walls. A small band played at one end of the room, and tables laden with food lined the other. It seemed the entire population of Agua Caliente had turned out, everyone dressed in their finest and determined to enjoy themselves after the hardships of recent months. Miss Adams, Mr. Lawson, Mrs. Holloway from the hotel greeted them at the door. "Don't you two make a handsome couple? Miss Adams, your dress is lovely, and is that one of your own creations?" She nodded toward Bethany's small hat, which was perched at a flattering angle. "It is," Bethany confirmed. "My first attempt at evening millinery since opening the shop." "You must make me one," Mrs. Holloway declared. "Nothing so youthful, of course, but something with similar elegance." As they moved through the crowd, Xavier noted with satisfaction how completely Bethany had been accepted into the community. Everyone had a warm greeting for her, many complimenting her work or inquiring when they might schedule a fitting for a new hat. When the band struck up a waltz, Xavier led Bethany onto the dance floor. "I warned you about my dancing," he murmured as he took her in his arms. "You're doing splendidly," Bethany assured him as they began to move in time with the music. Despite their mutual disclaimers about lacking practice, they moved well together, finding a natural rhythm that carried them smoothly around the floor. Xavier was acutely aware of Bethany's hand in his, the other resting lightly on his shoulder, the subtle floral scent of her perfume. "I never expected to find happiness again after the flood," Bethany said softly as they danced. "I thought I'd lost everything worth having." "And now," Xavier prompted, his heart quickening. Bethany's eyes met his, open and sincere. "Now I think perhaps the flood brought me exactly where I needed to be." The moment stretched between them, full of unspoken emotion. Xavier wanted nothing more than to kiss her, right there in the middle of the dance floor, but propriety held him back. Later, as they stood on the porch of the town hall taking in the cool night air, Xavier finally found the privacy and courage he needed. "Bethany," he said, taking both her hands in his, "these past months have been the happiest of my life." "Mine too," she replied, her expression soft in the moonlight. "I know it might seem sudden," Xavier continued, "but I feel as though I've known you forever." He took a deep breath. "I love you, Bethany Adams. I think I began falling in love with you the moment I pulled you from that river." Bethany's eyes glistened with tears, but her smile was radiant. "I love you too, Xavier. I tried to tell myself it was too soon, that I was just grateful to you for saving me, but it's so much more than that." Xavier cupped her face gently in his hands. "May I kiss you?" In answer, Bethany rose on tiptoe, meeting him halfway as his lips descended to hers. The kiss was tender at first, then deepened with the emotions they had both been containing for so long. When they finally parted, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he whispered. "Be my wife, my partner. Share copper crown with me." "Yes," Bethany answered without hesitation. "Yes, Xavier, I'll marry you." The news of their engagement spread through Agua Caliente faster than wildfire. By the following afternoon, it seemed everyone in town had stopped by Bethany's shop to offer congratulations, while Xavier received hearty backslaps and knowing grins from his ranch hands and fellow cattlemen. They decided on a short engagement, just 6 weeks, to allow time for preparations, and for Xavier's sister Alina to travel from San Francisco for the wedding. Bethany threw herself into creating the perfect wedding ensemble, including a special hat that she refused to let Xavier see before the day. "It's bad luck for the groom to see the bride's hat before the ceremony," she teased when he tried to peek at her work. "I'm fairly certain that's not the actual superstition," Xavier replied with a laugh. The weeks flew by in a flurry of preparations. Xavier had a room added to the ranch house, a dedicated workroom for Bethany's millinery, with large windows to provide the excellent light she needed. Bethany, meanwhile, divided her time between her shop in town and getting to know the ranch that would soon be her home. She proved to have a good head for the business side of ranching, helping Xavier review his ledgers and suggesting improvements to how he tracked expenses and profits. Her keen eye for detail complemented his more instinctive approach to ranch management. "We make a good team," Xavier observed one evening as they finished reviewing the quarterly accounts. "Your city education balances my country experience." "I like the sound of that," Bethany replied, smiling. "Partners in all things." The week before the wedding, Alina arrived from San Francisco, bringing trunks full of gifts and city fashions that caused a sensation in Agua Caliente. "So you're the woman who finally captured my brother's heart," Alina said upon meeting Bethany, embracing her warmly. "I began to think he'd never look up from those cattle ledgers long enough to notice a lady." "I didn't give him much choice," Bethany replied with a laugh. "He had to notice me when he pulled me half-drowned from the river." Alina, 5 years younger than Xavier and as outgoing as he was reserved, took to Bethany immediately. The two women spent hours together, Alina sharing stories of their childhood while Bethany showed her the wedding dress she was completing. "He loves you very much," Alina told Bethany the night before the wedding as they sat in Bethany's room above the mercantile. "I can see it in the way he looks at you. I've never seen him like this." "I love him too," Bethany said simply. "More than I ever thought possible after losing so much." Alina squeezed her hand. "Mother and father would have adored you. I wish they could be here tomorrow." "So do I," Bethany replied, thinking of her own parents and Sarah. "But I believe they'll be with us in spirit." The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, with the kind of flawless blue sky that Arizona was famous for. The ceremony was held in the small church in Agua Caliente, filled to capacity with townspeople, ranch hands, and neighboring ranchers who had come to see Xavier Lawson, confirmed bachelor, and steadfast cattleman, finally take a bride. Xavier waited at the altar, more nervous than he'd ever been facing stampeding cattle or armed rustlers. When the church door opened and Bethany appeared on the arm of Henry, his foreman who had offered to give her away, Xavier felt his heart might burst. Bethany was radiant in a gown of ivory satin with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Her hat, the secret creation she'd been working on, was a masterpiece of simplicity and elegance, with a small brim that framed her face perfectly, and a single blue ribbon that matched the flowers in her bouquet. Their vows were simple but heartfelt. When Xavier promised to love, honor, and cherish Bethany for all the days of his life, his voice rang with conviction that moved many in the congregation to tears. Bethany's response was equally sincere, her eyes never leaving his as she pledged herself to him. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride, Mr. Lawson." The kiss they shared was both proper enough for church and passionate enough to elicit a few whoops from Xavier's ranch hands in the back pews. The celebration afterward was held at Copper Crown, with tables set up under the cottonwood trees and lanterns hung from the branches to provide light as evening fell. There was music and dancing, abundant food prepared by Mrs. Finch and several town ladies, and enough champagne, imported specially from San Francisco at Aliner's insistence, to ensure the party continued well into the night. As darkness settled over the ranch, Xavier led Bethany away from the festivities to a quiet spot on the porch. "Happy, Mrs. Lawson?" he asked, still marveling at being able to call her his wife. "Completely," Bethany replied, leaning into him. "It feels like a dream." "If it is, I don't want to wake up," Xavier said, kissing the top of her head. "I keep thinking about how close I came to not finding you that day. If I'd ridden a different section of the river." "But you did find me," Bethany reminded him. "You pulled me from the water and told me not to go." "And you stayed," Xavier said, turning her to face him. "You stayed and made my life complete in ways I never imagined." "I'll always stay," Bethany promised, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. "Always." Aliner found them a few minutes later, interrupting their private moment with practiced sisterly timing. "There you are. The guests are asking where you've disappeared to. It's time for the last dance before you two can decently escape to be alone." Xavier laughed, taking Bethany's hand. "Duty calls, wife. Shall we?" The final dance was a waltz, just like their first dance at the Founders' Day celebration. As they moved across the makeshift dance floor, guests watching with approving smiles, Xavier felt a sense of rightness that settled deep in his soul. "I love you, Bethany Lawson," he whispered against her ear. "And I love you, Xavier Lawson," she replied, "now and always." Later, after the guests had departed, and they were finally alone in the ranch house that was now their shared home, Xavier carried Bethany across the threshold of their bedroom as tradition demanded. "Welcome home," he said, setting her gently on her feet. "Home," Bethany repeated, looking around the room that had been transformed with new curtains she had sewn and fresh linens Mrs. Finch had insisted upon. "It's perfect." As husband and wife, they discovered new dimensions to their love for each other, the physical expression of the emotional bond they had been building since the day Xavier pulled Bethany from the river. Their night was tender, passionate, and filled with promises of the life they would build together. In the weeks that followed, Bethany divided her time between the ranch and her shop in town, gradually transitioning the business to an appointment-only model that allowed her more flexibility. She continued to create hats for the women of Agua Caliente and increasingly for customers in Tucson and other settlements who had heard of her skill. Xavier found that marriage suited him better than he could have imagined. Having Bethany's warm presence in the ranch house transformed it from merely a place he lived to a true home. Her practical suggestions improved operations around the ranch, and her quick mind made her an ideal partner in all aspects of their life together. 6 months after their wedding, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset that painted the Arizona sky in spectacular shades of orange and pink, Bethany turned to Xavier with a special light in her eyes. "I have news," she said, taking his hand and placing it gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." Xavier's expression transformed from surprise to wonder to joy in the span of seconds. "A baby? You're certain?" Bethany nodded, her smile radiant. "Dr. Miller confirmed it this morning. He thinks the baby will arrive in early spring." Xavier gathered her into his arms, overwhelmed with emotion. "A family of our own," he whispered against her hair. "I never dared hope for so much happiness." The months of Bethany's pregnancy passed in a blend of anticipation and preparation. Xavier found himself unexpectedly nervous about becoming a father, having had little experience with children. Bethany, though equally new to parenthood, approached it with the same practical determination she brought to everything. "We'll learn together," she assured him when he confessed his concerns, "just as we've learned everything else." The baby, a boy they named Thomas James Lawson, after both their fathers arrived on a clear April morning in 1887, exactly 1 year after the flood that had brought Bethany into Xavier's life. He had his mother's hazel eyes and his father's strong features, and from his first cry he held both their hearts completely. "He's perfect," Xavier said, cradling his son with hands that seemed suddenly too large and rough for such a tiny being. "Absolutely perfect." Bethany watched them from the bed, exhausted but radiant. "He looks like you." "Poor child," Xavier joked, never taking his eyes off the baby's face. "Let's hope he grows out of it." Mrs. Finch, who had appointed herself honorary grandmother and hovered anxiously throughout Bethany's labor, bustled around the room straightening things that needed no straightening. "A fine, strong boy," she declared. "Just what Copper Crown needed another Lawson man to help run things someday." Life adjusted to accommodate their new family member. Xavier had a cradle built by the best carpenter in Agua Caliente, and it stood first beside their bed, then later in the nursery that had once been a storage room. Bethany temporarily closed her shop to focus on motherhood, though she continued to create hats at home when Thomas napped. As their son grew from infant to toddler, Xavier and Bethany found parenthood both more challenging and more rewarding than they had anticipated. Thomas had his father's determination, and his mother's curiosity, a combination that kept them constantly on their toes. When Thomas was 2, Bethany discovered she was expecting again. This time, she gave birth to twin girls Sarah Alina and Rose Catherine, named for her sister, Xavier's sister, and their mothers. The house that had once seemed so spacious suddenly felt perfectly filled with the sounds of children's laughter and occasional tears. "I never imagined this life," Bethany confessed to Xavier one evening as they sat on the porch, watching 3-year-old Thomas attempt to rope a fence post while the twin girls slept inside. "When the flood took everything, I thought my future was washed away with it." Xavier took her hand, rubbing his thumb over the simple gold band he'd placed there 3 years earlier. "Sometimes loss clears the way for something new to grow," he said. "Though I'd never have wished such suffering on you, I'm grateful every day that the river brought you to me." "As am I," Bethany replied, leaning against his shoulder. "Even through the worst pain, I think a part of me knew there would be joy again someday, I just never dreamed how much. As the years passed, Copper Crown prospered under their joint stewardship. Xavier's cattle business expanded, with Bethany's financial acumen helping guide wise investments in land and breeding stock. She eventually reopened her millinery shop in town, with an assistant to help during the 3 days a week she dedicated to the business. Thomas grew into a thoughtful young man who shared his father's love for the land and his mother's head for business. The twins developed distinct personalities. Sarah, the adventurous one who could ride almost as well as her brother. Rose, the creative spirit, who showed early talent for her mother's craft. By the time they celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary, Xavier and Bethany had built a life richer than either had dared imagine in the aftermath of tragedy. The flood that had nearly claimed Bethany's life had instead given her a new one as wife, mother, businesswoman, and beloved partner to a man who had once been a lonely rancher. 10 years, Xavier marveled as they rode together across the ranch land that spring morning, retracing the path where he had first shown Bethany his domain. Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I found you in the river. Other times, it seems I've loved you forever. Both can be true, Bethany replied, her riding skills now nearly matching his own after years of practice. The best parts of life often feel both new and eternal at the same time. They stopped their horses at the rise overlooking the valley, the same spot where they had paused during their first ride together. The view was largely unchanged cattle grazing peacefully, cottonwoods swaying in the breeze, the distant mountains standing sentinel over their land. "I have something for you," Xavier said, reaching into his saddlebag and withdrawing a small wooden box. "Anniversary tradition calls for tin, I believe, but I hope you'll forgive the deviation." Bethany opened the box to find a brooch of intricate silver work set with turquoise, a piece of jewelry both beautiful and practical enough for their Western life. "It's exquisite," she said, immediately pinning it to her riding jacket. "Thank you, my love." "I have a gift for you as well," Bethany told him, "though it's back at the house. I've been working on it in secret for months." When they returned to the ranch, Bethany led Xavier to her workroom, where a cloth-covered object stood on her table. "For the man who already has everything he needs," she said with a smile. "Something he definitely doesn't need, but I hope will cherish anyway." She pulled away the cloth to reveal a hat unlike any Xavier had seen, crafted of the finest leather, tooled with an intricate pattern that incorporated the Copper Crown brand, yet elegant enough for any formal occasion. "It's magnificent," Xavier said, carefully lifting it to examine the craftsmanship. "Your finest work yet. Only the best for the finest man I've ever known," Bethany replied. "Happy anniversary, my love." Xavier set the hat aside to take her in his arms. "How did I get so lucky?" He murmured against her hair. "I believe it was something about pulling a half-dead woman from a river and telling her not to go," Bethany teased, her arms tightening around him. "Best decision I ever made," Xavier declared, kissing her with the same passion that had grown steadily stronger through 10 years of marriage. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Thomas teaching the twins a game involving ropes and sticks, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze, Bethany leaned against Xavier's shoulder with a contented sigh. "You ever wonder about the paths not taken?" she asked. "If the flood hadn't happened, if you hadn't found me that day?" "Sometimes," Xavier admitted. "But then I look at you, at our children, at everything we've built together, and I know with absolute certainty that we were meant to find each other, however painful the journey." "I believe that too," Bethany said softly. "Out of disaster came the greatest blessing of my life, you, Xavier Lawson, and the family we've created." As twilight deepened into night, stars appearing one by one in the vast Arizona sky. They remained side by side, hands entwined, hearts beating in rhythm that had begun the moment he pulled her from the water and whispered, "Don't go." And she had stayed for a decade, for a lifetime, for always.